Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what? Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool.
My guest this time on the Learning Hack podcast is Steve Dineen, Chief Storyteller and CEO of Fuse Universal, the London-based learning technology company whose platform, based around video sharing and social learning, was highly influential in the evolution of what has become called the Learning Experience Platform. I followed Steve's career since his days with Fuel, the company he built and then sold in 2007. I was marketing manager with rival company Epic at that point, a fact he alludes to in the interview. I really wanted to talk about the role of his passion and purpose in building the innovative company that Fuse has become. But times being what they are, we also couldn't ignore the coronavirus crisis, which is having big impacts on the online learning industry across the board. And he has some really interesting, insightful things to say about that. But let's begin this story at the beginning. So Steve, your job title is CEO and Chief Storyteller. What's the story that you're telling?
I think it's a story of change. So I think our story has always been, how do we try to push industry beyond, I guess, where it's been, and what still predominantly has been a predominantly analog world of face-to-face delivery and perhaps a first generation world of online learning. And how do we help the industry transition to really, I guess, utilize the full potential of what next gen learning can be. And that's always been our story. And I think it's always for us to keep pushing the envelope and keep both innovating ourselves and finding interesting companies to partner with where we can keep pushing the envelope and really to prove that full potential of what learning technology can make a difference to business.
So what's your personal story? Going back a bit, how did you get into learning technologies in the first place? It's always an interesting question to ask because people come from such diverse backgrounds. And can you talk about the Fuel experience, which I remember being an old timer, and how that came to an end and how that led on to Fuse?
So my background is I've always had two passions, and my first roles and first jobs were always a combination of both training, learning, and technology. So my first job actually was a technical trainer at a company called Ingram Micro, where I was teaching Novell and Cisco and a whole bunch of technical accredited subjects, which I loved. And I loved spending my time in front of engineers and salespeople and being part of their growth and seeing actually the individuals who would flourish and go on and to better roles and better careers. And that was like, I guess, the passion. That was the part that really inspired me to see the change in individuals that we could make as an industry. And for me, I guess because I was both a learning geek and a technology geek, it became evident that my path would merge those two roles together. So my actually first business was a face-to-face training business, whereas I had about 20 trainers delivering lots of technology subjects in a classroom environment. And I guess my challenge to myself and to our business was, how do we scale that beyond the potential of these great trainers? And we had 20 amazing people, but actually, how do I get out to 100,000 people at one go and deliver that same level of greatness? That was, I guess, the initial challenge that we had and the challenge I put myself. And that eventually led us into the creation of my first tech company, which is Fuel, which is probably more content focused, digital content focused, with some technology inside that. And I think, to be fair, we answered some of that challenge. We answered some of the challenge of being able to distribute content out to 100,000 people in BT, within a really short time period. So I think in the first generation, we absolutely solved the challenge of distribution, but we kind of lost the educational value and lost the efficacy of the end result. So I think towards the end of that journey, the reality was, me and my team did the best we could do, and I'm not sure whether you can cut this in a podcast, but my R&D director used to say to me, "Steve, what we do is shit. It's the best shit out there, but it's still shit." And it was hard to argue, right? It was hard to argue, and I think that's probably a fair summary of how I felt, because I couldn't actually get through one of my own courses myself. And we were winning awards, as you were, I think, when you were at the rival company at the time. We were two of the best companies in the marketplace, and yet I still really struggled to get through our own content. So I knew the answer was partly to do what we were doing, but actually at the same point, nothing to do with what we're doing. And right. I think selling, and then therefore selling that company, to a US organization gave me a window of non-compete that allowed me to rethink everything.
Yeah. So did you do that typical cashed out entrepreneur thing? Went away, had a couple of beach holidays, twiddled your toes in the sand, then thought, sorry, I'll come back and do it all over again?
Not quite. I mean, I guess I need to quite. I think after creating so many health and safety and anti-money laundering courses for maybe people that it didn't have the biggest impact for, I needed to go find my soul. So actually, I started our charity and started delivering and developing digital content for schools in developing countries, specifically different countries across Africa, which is an amazing experience. I got to travel, across West African countries, East Africa, South Africa, and an amazing experience. And the catalyst for change was the education minister from Tanzania. One day I was at lunch in Senegal, and he said to me, "Look, it's great what you're doing in the 100 schools that you're helping for an hour a week per student. Giving them access to digital technology, but think bigger. It's a drop in the ocean of the impact you're doing. How do you provide?" And this was the question, right? How do you provide a world-class education solution to everyone in my country or everyone in my continent? Bearing in mind that it will take a generation to teach teachers. Yeah. And that was the wow moment question, right? That was like, wow, that's a great question. And I guess I went back to everything that I had known, around e-learning, LMS, and SCORM courses, and I thought, well, it's probably not that. So at least I knew what it wasn't. Right, because I'd spent a long time building that stuff and I couldn't get it through myself, and I wouldn't want to allow that many kids to hate me as well. So that was the question that allowed me then to go out there and start really thinking about, well, how do I create something that kids would want to use? How do I develop it in a way that's affordable? And how do I know that the end result is going to be a frictionless experience that people can get access to? And from that question came 6 more questions around how do I fund it? How do I build it? How do I design it? What's the experience look like? How do I start again? How do I reinvent it? All of those things. Yeah. I remember putting into a room some of the smartest people that I knew, like Charles Jennings and a few guys in from South Africa, put them into a room in Soho, London. We had 60 people in the room. I gave them the 6 questions, thinking my normal thing is find the smartest people you can and give them the questions, and they give you the answers. And what came back was 60 more questions. Yeah. Which wasn't my plan, right? My plan was to just get the answers. But then over time, I think then we started to find answers to each of those questions upon, how do you create the content in an interesting, engaging way? How do you reduce the cost of creating that content by, a multiple of 10? How do you reinvent what a learning platform should be, or rethink that, knowing that the world of YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn was now invented, which it wasn't when you and I started, right? When we started out in the first generation, those ideas weren't there, and we weren't able to leverage and steal and copy some of those concepts. So I guess at that point there, we were at 1.0, right? And those things weren't there. But I guess in a world post YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and so forth, you're able to see actually what consumers were choosing. So that was obviously really influential towards my thinking on the platform side, which I was thinking actually. So my initial thinking on the platform side was it's a combination of YouTube and LinkedIn. That was my kind of real initial layer. So a content system like YouTube, but maybe more multimedia, and to bring social back into learning, because I kind of saw that in our first generation 1.0, we killed social, which we know in a learning perspective is absolutely critical and crucial to the learning process. And then we managed to break through in the content piece. We managed to have a big breakthrough where we recognized that we could just record an expert digitally, answering the questions in the right way. And then from that, we'd be able to create a nice succinct piece of audio which explained any concept or procedure, and then put one designer to visualize that. And literally the same day or within days, we're able to create content that kids loved and adults loved. So the combination, I think, of rethinking, and I think it's that marriage, right? So we had to rethink the content strategy and the technology strategy and understand what the marriage of those two worlds looked like in order to reinvent, I think, everything we needed to reinvent to create what's become a very successful charity for us. We now have 1 million to 2 million kids accessing it, every month, and obviously a successful commercial business as well.
That's a really good summary of how you got from content to content plus platform. And the significant breakthrough you made with moving to platform was video sharing. as a platform, which was ahead of the game. And actually, you're moving to kind of a Web 2.0 type of mindset with platform was ahead of the game. Josh Burson has cited Fuse as being an early innovator in the product category. He did so much to publicize the learning experience platform, the LXP. But my guess is you didn't set out to invent the LXP with Fuse. And that's always made you, in a way, a bit of an outlier. I mean, I've noticed looking at the 9 grid, the Fosway 9 grid, you've moved from being an NGLE last year to this year being a suite, which is weird. What is your view of how Fuse sits in the learning systems landscape?
I think there's no doubt it's confusing, right? So there's no doubt that there's lots of terminologies and lots of language, and the fact that the analysts don't agree on one set of terms makes it really hard, I think, both for the buyer and for the vendors. Yeah. For us, obviously, what we were trying to create, and we were trying to create was a platform that people wanted to choose to learn from. That was the initial goal, right? And as you said, the first layers of Fuse and the first thing we built 8-9 years ago was focused on both user experience. So how do we create something from a mobile and desktop side that people want to choose to use? That the belief that we could create content in a new way, that bite-sized content would be absolutely core to the future. Mobile should be embedded into the bedrock. And that video would probably be not the only stream, but the main delivery mechanism for that. And I think those things we actually got right. We look today across 120 clients, we can look at our data, and video is without a doubt the number one, and has been for some time, the number one delivery mechanism. Mobile is absolutely key, and it allows us to reach places and organizations which were only touching 10% of the organization before, and now they're able to reach the whole organization the same day. I think in terms of categories, then I think to be fair, where Fosway have got to is pretty close, right? Where you've got niche providers and you've got basically the hub ecosystem providers. So, and I think it's fair to put us as a place to say we're trying to play, and we are playing in a way that we can either be, and we're quite, I guess, unique in this way, in that we do play in some of our clients, maybe 20% of our clients, as the second platform, whatever you want to label that as, LXP, NGLE, whatever label that happens to be. But in essence, it's the second platform. And then in some organizations, 80% of organizations, we're the core platform, which then we also connect in other kind of niche platforms, into Fuse, and libraries, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not overly keen with the term LXP because I think, when we first started talking about learning experiences, I think our definition of a learning experience has been somewhat changed to what our vision of that was. For us, a learning experience was, how do you create an holistic experience that achieves the business impact for a particular audience? And recognizing that inside our platform, we recognize these different audiences need different experiences. In some of those, for a sales audience, you might need a combination of formal learning, informal learning, social coaching, task-based activities, and so forth. For a different audience, it might be purely informal, or for compliance, it might be purely formal. So for us, the experience was much more around how do you use different tools, and I guess a learning artist is now choosing on its palette of tools which tools to use for each experience that it wants to design for. I think if we look at what's defined now by LXP vendors or learning experience vendors, as Josh defined it initially, he initially defined it, I think, as the curation vendors, the vendors that were very good at curating libraries, and maybe now are moving into kind of skills and stuff too. And they do their job, and they do the job well. But that's a very different, I think, earlier on he bucketed all us into the same category. And I think other analysts viewed that differently. And obviously, I think every analyst you talk to has got a slightly different opinion, which is why it probably confuses it. So, but for us, I think absolutely. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, and in my view, it's not just that they have a different opinion about a particular thing, but the particular thing is different. The approaches now seem so different. When last time on the podcast we had Danny Johnson at Red Thread, who is very into ecosystems and has some very interesting stuff about ecosystems. And you have this other term, which is in a way from the old world, the stack. And people have talked about the LXP, which you might or might not be as an experience layer, which is another way of kind of thinking of it rather than as a second platform. It's a kind of layer in the stack. But that stack thing seems to be decomposing, and there's this ecosystem, which the world of APIs has brought us. So it's a confusing picture, and they're competing models, and none of them seems to be dominant. I actually think that's great from my point of view.
No, exactly, because everyone's trying to understand and trying to understand and cut through the confusion. But I do think those are probably the two views of the world, right? That do you buy 6 systems? Do you buy an LMS, an LXP, a learning record store, a learning content management system, a social learning system, and then you try to knit all those together, and then also bring in, and then have the flexibility to bring in all these third-party tools. I think we've taken a different approach and say, why don't we build a richer set of core functionality that means you don't need 3, 4, 5 of those systems, but you have the flexibility to bring in third-party tools. So for us, the learning suite is probably closer towards it. And I think what we have found is, the LMS vendors have gone downwards to include, LXP type functionality. We as a next generation platform have gone upwards to include LMS functionality, but those platforms are radically different because, people like us, we designed our platform and architecture from the experience upwards rather than maybe the LMS vendors, which is record keeping downwards. But I think, therefore, what we've ended up with in our proposition to the market very much is saying that you've got a brilliant analytics tool in Fuse, so you don't need an LRS. You've got, obviously, our core. We built Fuse as a social learning system and a learning content management system. So those things are core inside it. 70% of our client base and more are using us as a learning management system. And the LXP functionality is majority of it's inside it, and if not there, the rest of it's on the roadmap to be built out in the immediate short term. But then the big difference to us is then the ability to be flexible to allow all of these third party, all these really great tools, and we're partnered with half a dozen of these that you can then add as you want to your ecosystem, because the ecosystem is saying it's not a platform suite, it's about flexibility to recognize the market moving so quickly that you want to be able to leverage some of these great third party tools that come to market.
Interesting. We were talking a bit earlier about Fuse School as being part of the origins of Fuse, which when I was kind of researching you, I just hadn't realised that actually you've got this kind of base in having looked in the opposite direction in a way for your purpose, and then we're kind of driven back to this. What's happened to Fuse School since, and it must be playing a part nowadays in everybody trying to homeschool their kids.
Yeah, no, it's we've again, like everything, our traffic has increased by 50% with Fuse School over the last couple of weeks. So obviously it's become it has been obviously really useful for lots of parents, lots of kids, but especially right now, it's becoming a critical tool. So Fuse School obviously was absolutely the soul of the organization, and I think it's where our creativity started and why we think differently. Because we were actually trying to create something that worked for the child, the parent, the teacher, rather than creating a product itself. And I think if we had, not to say there's anything wrong with that, right? But it's just your mind works differently. When you're trying to create something to really help the end user, and you're paying for it out of your own pocket, and you really want to make a change in the world, that's very, very different to where you're trying to create a product which solves a problem that you can make money from. And again, obviously there's very good reason for doing for both. But for us, we probably broke through a whole bunch of thinking because we were trying to create something for the kids. So with that in mind, we thought about the whole content part completely differently, and we still have 30 people in Fuse that are creating that content, and we teach our clients how to create content like Fuse School, which is 10 times cheaper and 10 times more effective. So that content piece was absolutely critical and a big creativity breakthrough. And even today, for example, we're launching in 4 weeks' time a new Fuse School app, which absolutely is at the edge what we think of innovation, as we've integrated a third-party tool, which is one of our partners that does adaptive learning and spaced repetition. So we have all the Fuse School content to teach you maths or chemistry for a 13, 16-year-old, but now we're adding to it the ability that if you've got your exam in June time, it will ask you those questions frequently to make sure, once you understand it, that knowledge stays fresh inside your head. And that technology is in advance of Fuse, and we will, without a doubt, learn from Fuse School. And as we've always done, we'll take that R&D and we'll build that back into our core product.
I've worked with a lot of companies in learning technologies, but there are none I would recommend as wholeheartedly as Learning Pool. They have some of the most leading-edge, award-winning tech around, but also an approachable, honest style that means they're equally at home helping people take their first steps in digital learning. They're great with organisations small and large. They do platform, content, authoring, analytics and more, and have a 98% customer satisfaction rating. So if you have a problem to solve or an opportunity you need a can-do partner to help you make the most of, go to learningpool.com.
I mean, it's so interesting that you've got these two strands to what you're doing, but my kind of experience of working on corporate strategy is that whatever works for you also works against you. And does this give you a slight problem in that you're kind of tilted towards the education market, which is a very different market to the corporate market? Do you feel you're straddling that market? Is Fuse School mostly for the developing world? Or, I mean, obviously we're in a situation where it is showing all
Yeah.
sorts of different uses, but before that was,
Well,
what,
I think so. There's a suite of stuff in there. Obviously, I would say for everyone inside our company, it's a core part of why they work in the company. It's a reason for joining. It's a reason. It's a some days when it's tough, when you've been working really hard and long and being challenged by challenges. It's the thing that gives you that extra step to jump out of bed and to run of the day. So I think for all of us in the company, and I think also our clients. I think a lot of our clients are attracted to Fuse because they believe we're also a good company trying to do good things in the world. We're not just out there to return investor dividends, which we recognise is also part of what we have investors. We need to make sure that we have a duty of care to them. But I think for all of us, it's in the back of our minds. It's something that we know there is energies and efforts going in towards it that are in our commercial business that benefit our social impact. And I wouldn't say it's, we have a team of 6-7 people that work on Fuse School. That's separate, but other people obviously jump in and help out, as and when they need to. But as you can see, if you look at some of the innovations we had over the years, the content advantage we have, I think we think very differently about content, and we help our clients with their thinking around their content strategies only because we create a Fuse School. We wouldn't have had that thinking if we didn't actually create Fuse School. And likewise, I think this next big breakthrough we're doing, which I see a lot of our clients now will replicate in how to do compliance training. I think they'll view this concept of bite-sized training with spaced repetition. You've only got to learn the stuff that you've forgotten and keep it fresh in your head. I think absolutely we're going to see go straight back into our corporate business. So for me, it's not a distraction. For me, it's the thing that makes me work 20-30% harder every day. And I think likewise for many people that are core to our company.
a lot of people will be using Fuse School at the moment to homeschool their kids. We're recording this at the end of March. It'll air probably in late April. And at the moment, what with the coronavirus, things are changing very quickly on a day-to-day basis. So I realise you don't want to give any hostages to fortune, but what can you tell us about how the crisis is affecting your business and your clients' businesses?
So sorry, for Fuse or Fuse School? For Fuse.
For Fuse, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's I mean, obviously we're in a time where we're trying to predict the future, but based upon the experience we've never lived before. So it'd be really interesting when this airs to see how much of that forecast we got right. So I think what we are seeing, we're seeing a few things. Obviously, the number one is to make sure, obviously, we look after our teams and make sure everyone's safe, and that's the number one focus for us. The second is obviously to see what we can do to help our customers. So how do we what can we do? What can we think about? So, like many other companies, we're creating free content around the coronavirus, remote working, and so forth, which we're giving to our customers and anyone else that wants access to that. So that's a minimum that we're doing. We obviously see a big spike in usage of Fuse over the last few weeks. I checked it this morning, and it's a 50% spike. 50% in the last couple of weeks.
50.
And
wow.
when we Yeah. And when we dig into that, and see, okay, what's the type of content and what's happening inside that? Interestingly enough, obviously, a lot of it actually, because Fuse is often used by many of our clients as an internal comms tool, we're seeing a massive drive towards that type of content. So you can imagine that organizations want to now or need to communicate out in a different way, where head offices, people were used to just walking around and talking to each other, or town halls or big meetings. That's all stopped. Obviously we have web conferencing stuff, which helps at a team level, and chat helps at a team level, but at a company-wide level, Fuse seems to be filling a big gap to allow an organization to talk to its entire organization and allow a two-way dialogue back the other way. So, and also the second thing we see there is content that's specific. So, like clients like Ocado and others, which have still got people, on the front line, how to give them the latest information, latest updates. How do they talk to their clients? How do they work with their customers? What do they say? That stuff becomes absolutely critical. So as a tool to allow two-way dialogue and two-way communication with a big audience, we see that's probably the bigger driver. That's the immediate driver, I think, of traffic on our platform. Yeah. I think what we're seeing after that, what we're starting to see coming in, and it's interesting from, there's no doubt what the other thing we'll see, and we are seeing, is delays, because people are trying to understand what's going on. So new business for us would obviously delay until people understand what's coming through, not completely, but in some cases. But at the same point, we see, a rush of other organizations coming to us saying, if you're a training business, then actually, you've got to rethink the whole model overnight. So we're helping a lot of companies now to rethink business models that are much more digital or purely digital. And what does that offering look like? So, we have about 15% of our client base is training companies today already. And obviously the ones that made that transition are not as worried to those ones that are purely sort of face to face. So there's a big demand, for that side that's coming to us. And then I think you've got L&D departments who are, once the dust is settled, and they recognize that there's some safety and, back down to your Maslow hierarchy side, then it's, okay, now we're calm, we've got through the initial shock. Okay, how do we start to operate and how do we still add value to the organization in terms of learning? We're starting to see those conversations come through. And I think that will happen a lot over the next 3-4 weeks as people kind of start to say, okay, brush it off, dust myself down. Okay, how do I start to do my job again? And how do I start using digital tools like Fuse and others to really accelerate the value I can add to my organization in the short to medium term?
Of course, there is a bit of a worry that's been expressed in some quarters that, okay, yeah, there's a rush to get your training online or to put more training online than you had because all the face-to-face element has completely disappeared now. There's a danger that people are seeing that in that they rush towards the most kind of basic and traditional model, which is LMS plus courses, because you don't have a basic and traditional model.
No.
In a sense, but is it difficult helping those people to make also the mental change that they've got to make, the kind of theoretical conceptual change to be able to use your platform?
No, I think that's absolutely true, right? Because as you said, so although we do have kind of classic LMS functionality in the product, that's more there to allow people to change rather than that's the thing that we want them to focus on. So for every client, we start our conversation with what's the problem you're trying to solve. So if you're the move to use Fuse in any client pre-corona is absolutely focused on the first question of what's the business impact and what's the reason to change. And then to work backwards from that business problem towards, okay, how does the technology, how does the new skill sets in your team, how do you think about content strategy? What are all those things we need to help you with in order to move to this new world? And I think exactly the same now. I think you're right. I think the people that, if they knee jerk and just simply take the old world of learning and try to put that online, we know for 20 years, right, that's going to end up in failure. And there's lots of companies that have just wasted millions and millions, I think, in that approach. So rather than that kind of ground up approach of let me just replicate my face-to-face in an online way, I think we would recommend the opposite approach. Take the time to breathe and actually ask the bigger question first. Okay, what's my real problem I'm trying to get to here? So if I'm a training company, I need to change my model completely. If I'm L&D, I want people to be great at their jobs. I want them to perform better. Maybe I want to measure that they're better. Okay, now I've got this plethora of tools and thinking and so forth. How do I understand that? And how do I mix and match the right part of that to allow something that's of higher value than what I had before, which was mainly face-to-face delivery? So I think it's really flipping the view you come at it with from top-down problem rather than ground up. Let's just knee-jerk and create, go from courses in a classroom to courses online.
I'd kind of like to flip back now to the Fuse School that we were talking about before and ask about that. How's the crisis affected Fuse School?
Yeah, so I think in two ways. So in the short term, we've asked the team maybe because we finished off the secondary school curriculum, which was a big piece of work that 800 videos, animated videos that sits on YouTube covering biology, chemistry, physics, maths for 12 to 16-year-olds, and we know that content's great and people love it. It sits on both Fuse and YouTube inside that, and free for everyone forever. So obviously just by nature, people are finding it, and that traffic is increasing, and again has increased 50% in the last couple of weeks. And then we were going down. So the team was working on primary school curriculums, before the pandemic, and now we've obviously said let's pause that and let's try and see what we can do to add as much value as we can to teachers, parents, and how do we rethink everything. So we're doing some things now where we're helping partners across the world translate that content in different languages. We have a partner we just signed off yesterday that's translating into Turkish. It's being used in Urdu and in Hindi out in Asia. And we have other partners around the world that are translating that to get that into schools and into places elsewhere, both audio and text. In some cases, and other cases like Polish and so forth, we're going to use our own translation engine and transcription engine to allow that to be available in subtitles in as many languages as we can in the immediate term. And then in about 4 weeks' time, we've been working in the background to create a new app for Fuse School, so for the kids and for the parents, which allows them to self-learn. So an app that allows them to test and understand where they're at against examination, and then to allow them to do a kind of Duolingo type approach of questions and quizzes to allow them to make sure that the knowledge is going ahead. So, and the whole team is literally working evenings and weekends now to see what we can do to fast track that, to get that out there again, as a free of charge offering out there. And then, interesting enough, maybe the third thing that's not necessarily related to Corona was, we found an amazing partner end of last year, and called Hello World. And my vision and the team's vision initially for Fuse School was this would initially be helping the people right at the bottom of the pyramid. So if following the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid type analogy, that could we create something in Fuse School that would reach everyone, right at that kind of bottom level of $1 a day, $1 a month type earnings, $1 a day type earnings. And this partner basically has built what they call it an internet hub. So for $5,000 or pounds, I can't remember which, I think the same thing this week, that they literally put it in, and it has 8 tablets, solar paneled, connected to the internet, and allows that whole village to connect to the internet to learn, get the updates and so forth. We just had two of our team out with that team out in Uganda, just to actually, the first step for us was getting Fuse School content onto the tablets to see that that's all good, which it was. The second part to it was then creating how-to videos of how to install these internet hubs. So literally you could drop the hub on a phone to a community, and that they could become connected and start to learn. And obviously our vision for that, to get back to post-Corona, would be how do we help that vision happen? Because what's been interesting over the last couple of years is Fuse School has been immensely successful in terms of the usage of it, but it's mainly still being used in developing countries. So it is, the number one audience for it is the US, followed by the UK. We have India and so forth up there as well, but it's mainly developing countries. So I think it's great that we can get back to doing both. How do we get back to that story that we're really focused on? That if we can prove that you can help 2,000 kids in the village, 2,000 people in the village be connected to learn those subjects, and the fact that many of them can't go to school for different reasons, they can't afford it that day or other things, that actually amazing. And literally the guys came back and told us a story of the trip there last week, and it was, I think, for all of us completely inspiring, and shows us the future route we want to continue to take.
It's a moment of change, obviously, a moment of big change, and there's a lot of opportunity in that, a lot of uncertainty. And looking forward, it might be a bumpy road for all of us with the coronavirus. It might be a longer road in some respects than some people currently anticipating. But to the extent that you can see any predictability in the future for your company and your roadmap, and perhaps more generally, what should we expect to see from Fuse?
Yeah, so I think, as you said, right, I think there's probably two. There's the hopeful plan that is in 3 months' time that we're through the worst of this, and we start to get back to some level of normality of how we do business. But I think we've all got to plan that it may last for 6 months, and that's what we're doing. So we're lucky enough that we have great investors, and our bank balance is good because of that. So we're not in a kind of a high risk scenario. And obviously, because our business model is SaaS based, license based per year, we're not at the level of risk which I imagine there's lots of other companies out there that are having a much tougher time. So for us in the short term, obviously, again, we've had conversations the last week or so that do we prioritize certain things that are much more advantageous and helpful in the short term. So that's exactly what we're doing. So there's releases of functionality that we think would benefit organizations from an internal communications piece, technologies that allow people to do more blended learning, so deeper integrations between webinar technologies and Fuse. So we're perhaps being a little bit more tactical, because we're trying to add things right now into the platform over the next weeks and months to come that we think is going to help in the current crisis, and maybe putting back some of those the longer term things. At the same time, nothing's stopping in our roadmap. So our big vision of where we want to take learning is absolutely still inside there, and those projects are still running. So one of the big things we really believe in is moving. We see our most successful clients. When I say successful, being the most engaged users, accessing content mainly through search rather than through formal learning. So the amount of content. So a good client for us is generating 60, 70% activity or engagement, by week and by month. And those clients, obviously a proportion of that is formal learning, but the majority of it is I'm searching for the stuff that I don't know how to do my job. And our big investment that we're making over the next year or so is to move from searching for the content that has the answer into more like Google, which is using technology to allow you to find the answer.
A lot of that sounds like performance support. What about the other side of learning where you want to embed something deeply and code it so that it goes into long-term memory? Nick Shackleton-Jones makes this difference between stuff that needs to happen very seamlessly and quickly, basically performance support, and then on the other hand, experiences, or what you might call real deep learning. Fuse catered for both, or are you more focused on the former?
No, I think we want to enable and support all of that, right? So, but recognize that it's not necessarily us that does it purely through all the technology. So, I think the partnerships with other organisations to fill things in are key towards it. So, if I take our best clients and what they do in terms of learning design, they start with that problem. So, if it's a sales organisation or a service organisation, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Is it increased conversion rates in the sales team? Is it better NPS scores in the call center? So what's the goal? How do we know we're succeeding? So if we make some assumptions, we put this perfect learning design in place, we're going to make some assumptions that we can increase the delta on the sales team. Maybe the average conversion rates is 30%, the top people are 60%. So the assumption is we can shift the dial closer towards 60% if we put the right design in place. Likewise for anything, right? So what we see again is our top clients always thinking about the problem and then the measurement of that KPI if they achieve it. And then for us, I think it then goes into, okay, what do we not teach? So what becomes pure performance support? And again, our clients range from 60 to 90% depending upon the program. So 60 to 90% of the content they're building not to be taught, but only to be searched for a point of need. And then 10 to 30% is being designed for that experience part that you're talking through. But all 100% of content is being designed for performance support. It's all being designed. So whether some of it is taught formally and some of it is only available, by search, all of it is being designed in a way that you can search and find that content in the moment of need. I mean, at the moment, that's done at a micro level, a concept procedure level. But our next engine, we're going to go deeper and take it right down to that kind of the answer to the question level. And then to your next point, to what does that experience look like? I think this is where we buy into a lot of the work that's been done with companies like the 70-20-10 Institute, and actually some guys in Sweden like the Nodi guys, which I really like, which is task-based learning. So what's the combination of the content I need to understand, and then what's the activities that I'm going to be recommended to do that's going to then embed the knowledge into behaviors in that 10 to 30%. So that sales skills or that demoing, I might understand how to do things well, but maybe the task or activity may be I've got to upload a video and actually practice it. I've got to shadow the best salesperson for 2 or 3 meetings. Et cetera, right? So those tasks going alongside the content towards it, and then obviously utilizing aspects of the platform appropriately, being that community-based learning, social-based learning, task activities, and so forth. And then obviously data to understand, and analytics to understand when's it working, when's it not. How do I correlate my business data with my learning data and understand the levers that make the difference towards that? And then for us, then the last layer for that then is the continuous learning piece. How do you create the culture that the organization isn't just thinking upon that learning experience as the beginning and end, but how do they continue to codify the experience that it happens and the new knowledge that happens, and how do they make sure that then they're using the technology in the right way to get that to the right people, whether that content sits in the organization or whether that's brought in automatically from experts from articles externally.
Seems to me the world divides suddenly into people who've got loads of time on their hands and people who've got absolutely no time because they're shoveling away, trying to work very quickly to cope with the effects of this crisis. So thanks a lot for coming along and bringing your reflections.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for giving me a chance to talk about the things I'm most passionate about.
And you are very passionate about them. It really comes across. So thanks for that.
Cheers. All right. Good luck and stay safe. Take care.
And
Bye.
you. Bye.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. With so much on his plate, I'm really glad that Steve could take time out to record this podcast. So thanks to him and to our sponsor, Learning Pool. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. Please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to get future episodes automatically. And if you're keen to help other people find us as well, please give us a review and a 5-star rating. If you want to sponsor or give any feedback, you can reach me at John Helmer on Twitter or through my website, johnhelmerconsulting.com. Next time on The Learning Hack, well, I hope you're ready for this. There's one person in learning who consistently polarizes opinion and overturns preconceptions. It's lifelong contrarian Donald Clark. He's my guest and he's talking about AI. It won't be boring.
Now I finally get it.
So I think the personal level we're doing okay. Obviously, adjusting to complete remote working from home takes a little bit getting used to. But to be fair, I kind of enjoy spending more time with my family and stuff. So so it's a dirty secret that actually probably I'm actually kind of enjoying that aspect of it. And the only thing that's a bit strange is I find to see myself on Zoom calls for like 12 hours a day. So it's that's the only, I guess, part to adjust.